Having sat multiple choice question exams for 4+ years in school, university, and having sat several standardized tests, I've now compiled the 8 most important test-taking tactics that will immediately improve your performance during the exam. I'm one of those people that unnecessarily overthinks every single question in the exam, and when it comes to multiple choice questions, this is a huge weakness because I can justify why half of those options would be the correct one. So instead of just sitting there and brewing, a much better tactic is to speed through the exam. Test-taking studies show that students who trust themselves to skim through the entire exam and then answer all the easy questions they encounter the first time around perform significantly better under exam conditions. They've primed themselves to the topics involved in the exam and they're a lot more prepared to the difficulty of questions that are about to come up. Hence, they're able to allocate their time during the exam and focus on their advantages a lot better than anyone else. Personally, I try to make the most of that first run through. Yes, I answer all the easy questions that I can find, but I also look at the harder questions and mark them with a single question mark if I'm slightly unsure about them, and with double question marks if I have no idea what the question is talking about. Then you can go through the exams the second time considering each of the harder questions with a lot more thought. This time you won't just be spending endless amounts of time on one hard question. You know how many there are because you mark them all with question marks, and so you'll be a lot more aware of the time and effort that you can give to each of those questions. Always read the question very, very clearly and do it 2 times. Obviously you all do this, but pay special attention to this in the exam. I've screwed up so many questions in the past where I haven't read the all or the not in the question. Which of the following is not a role of nitrous oxide? I just remember skimming that, reading role and nitrous oxide, and then looking at the answer options. And that is the wrong tactic because even if you do figure out that it did say not, you still end up wasting time. We all make careless mistakes in that exam frenzy, so just read the question twice to be as clear as possible. The best way to answer multiple choice questions is to answer the question in your head before you even look at the choices. You need to take a guess and anticipate the answer before you even look at the options because there's always some of them that the examiner has set to be distractor options. No examiner is going to give you the easy answer and then make all the rest of the answers completely different and easy to distinguish from. I spoke to a professor about this in medical school who actually set up part of the exams that we had. What she said is that the majority of the people that get answers wrong to a question, they pick those distractor options. They're very sneaky, they look really similar to the correct answer, and a lot of people do then mistake them to be the right answer. So just make sure that you're answering the question in your head before you look at the rest of the options. Treat the process of elimination like your best friend in multiple choice questions. Our brains are much more effective when there are fewer options to actually work with. So after anticipating the answer, when you do read the options, cross out the ones that are obviously wrong immediately. Make sure that they are the ones that you can truly rule out. The common advice is to not use the process of elimination when you're guessing, but at the end of it, even if I am unsure, my confidence is still quite good because I know that I can logically work through, eliminate the answers that seem the least likely, and use intuition to at least come to 2 answers that then I can choose between. The people writing your multiple choice questions are very clever, and they intentionally try to phrase the answer choices in a very tricky and distraction-based way. The answer choices that contain the words all, never, always, these absolute words tend to be wrong usually, while the answer choices that contain the words generally, usually, probably, sometimes, these sorts of answers tend to be more correct. At times you have 2 of the answer options only differing by a word or 2, or sometimes each answer choice is a sequence that looks like this. In these cases, it's almost always one of the 2 options that look the most similar compared to the other options. When I'm stuck between 2 answer options, I first think about which answer is more true. Second, which of them has a better argument behind it. And after properly thinking about it, if I still don't have the right answer, then I imagine the professor explaining each of those answer options as one of the right ones. For some answers, it's also helpful to think about what assumptions are being made for this answer option to be right. Properly thinking about these and addressing these questions helps narrow down your choice. And well, if you still don't have it, then your best bet is to just guess. Most people, including that professor, said that going with your gut instinct when picking the answer at any point during the exam is the best option. And to an extent, I do agree with this. Our intuition is very valuable and you do have to trust yourself. But in my opinion, don't be adamant about changing your answer choice or not changing it later on. You have to go with the answer choice that has the best logical reasoning behind it, regardless of what you did before. It has to be in that moment. What is my best argument? If I come back to the question or remembered something more or encountered a different question that gave me a clue to this earlier question, then I just reassess the answer options and go with what best makes sense in my head. But remember, I'm only changing my answer if there's a very good logical reasoning behind it. So don't just panic and do it for no reason. Leverage the way your brain works. For calculation-based questions, I didn't really do the speed through the exam strategy. Instead, I chose to adapt a very simple method mentioned in the book Mind for Numbers that capitalizes on how our brain works on problems. How it works is that you first start by jumping straight into the hardest questions possible in that test. You put a good amount of effort in it, but if you get stuck, you switch to an easier question. When you're done, you go back to the hard problem and give it another shot, and then you keep repeating until all the questions are done. I know it sounds simple, but when you switch to that easier problem, what's actually happening is that your brain is shifting to diffuse mode. To be clear, your brain was in focus mode when you were working on that hard problem, but it switched into diffuse mode when you switched to that easier problem. The subconscious parts of your brain are continuing to process the harder problem while you work on that easier one. Also, by switching to this easier problem, you're sidestepping this thing called the Einstein effect, which is when you have fixed ideas about a problem and can't see a solution. This obviously wastes time. So by doing this hard to easy mode switching, you can save time by getting the easy questions out of the way while your brain works on new ideas. The only issue I do face with this is when not all the questions in my exam are actually easy, and even the easier ones are still quite difficult. So it is difficult to switch into that diffuse mode where I'm just going through questions and easily doing them. Let's do some rapid fire tips for chemistry, physics, engineering, any calculation based exams. A simple but effective tip I have for the MCQ questions that are more calculation based are to focus on the method that the question is trying to assess. Ask yourself to think like the examiner. If I made this test, what method would I be assessing in this question? If you see a question that's similar to the past papers that you had, try and remember the traps and mistakes you made when you were giving those questions. Try and imagine yourself in that environment when you were doing that exam. Did you forget about converting the units? Did you make a mistake with the substitution of the equations? Think about it very, very clearly and don't make that same error. For chemistry, what made the biggest impact on my grades was to read the question and work out the answer before I looked at the answer options. I calculated it, worked it out beside the MCQ, and only then did I check the answer. I know I've said this before, but this sort of stuff really helps not confuse you. And because these MCQ questions aren't crazy difficult, if you do ignore those answer options, you will at the end of it arrive to the right option. So many of us overthink and stress over one question that we don't know. So to avoid this, think about your instinct and your examiner. There's a lot of unconscious information that is stored in your brain that you won't remember immediately. So this is a bit weird, but to trigger those things, try and imagine you checking the exam in the future and think about which options you would have selected that would have ended up being wrong. The things I've talked about today come from years of experiences from my friends and myself doing these multiple choice questions. And what I really need you to understand is that just knowing about them or just listening to this video and taking this in isn't going to be enough to improve your exam performance. You're going to have to actively implement that in the exam and walk in the exam room with a plan of action. If you're behind on your exam prep and need a step-by-step cramming guide to give you some practical tips to speed up the process, then check this video out. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this helped, and I'll see you next week.